Who is seen as a bad guy in history but was actually okay?
The lady who sued McDonald's for giving her third-degree burns.
Despite what was portrayed in Amadeus, and though they were in fact musical rivals, Antonio Salieri was actually friends with Wolfgang Mozart. In fact, years after Mozart's death, Salieri actually assisted with and helped finance his son Franz Xaver's musical education as a tribute to his late friend.
William en.m.wikipedia.org Wiki William McMaster Murdoch was the guy who shoots 2 passengers and then himself in Titanic. In reality, while there were reports of an officer shooting 2 passengers and then committing suicide, there was nothing confirming it to have been Murdoch. In fact, Murdoch was in charge of launching lifeboats on the starboard side and had launched more than half of his fully loaded lifeboats before anyone else launched any. No one knows for sure what happened to him aside that he was lost with the ship.
More so sports history, but the film Cinderella Man portrayed boxer Max Baer as a murderous psychopath who gladly killed 2 fighters in the ring. In reality, he was personally devastated by these deaths. In the one he was most directly responsible for, he ended up giving his winnings from his next few fights to the fighter's family.
Not a real person, but Western media has sort of equated Hades with the Christian devil, which is very much not who he was in actual Greek mythology. In fact, he's actually one of the most sober and well-behaved of the Greek gods. The only mischief he ever really gets up to is tricking Persephone into living with him, otherwise he mostly kept to himself and did his job.
A dingo actually did come and eat Lindy Chamberlain's infant child. Unfortunately, that sort of thing is extremely hard to prove one way or another and was only resolved fairly recently, 2012. For the last 41 years people made fun of a lady whose child was eaten by a wild animal, akin to a coyote for the non-Aussies. That beep is beep up. Seinfeld, Simpsons, Rugrats, Modern Family, just to name a couple of mass media productions that have made fun of her in their worldwide reach. Meryl Streep played her in a reenactment of the beep ordeal. I feel so bad for that poor woman. Her kid's death became a meme for 41 beep years. Yes, not 32 years, I'm saying 41 years because it still is. Most of all, I blame the Australian police and government for beep this up and releasing the details. That beep is not right.
Paul Rubens. For decades of my life I was under the impression that Pee Wee Herman was guilty of some child predator beep, but no. Dude was just spotted in a porn theater. I don't think the masturbation claims were ever even substantiated. Meaning he lost his career because he legally watched porn in his personal free time. Edit, typo edit, holy crap. That's my first ever gold. Thank you mightily, kind stranger.
Monica Lewinsky. Gonna leave it at that.
Alfred Nobel. This is kind of a stretch but funny story. Before his death, a news publication accidentally printed his obituary and it basically blamed him for so much death and destruction, being the inventor of dynamite. So knowing what the world really thought about him and his legacy, he decided to have a new will written up describing the Nobel Prize, and he would give most of his fortune to that foundation to acknowledge and celebrate those who, during the preceding year, have conferred the greatest benefit to humankind. His surviving family only got to share 0.5% of his fortune. At the time of his death he owned 93 factories and about 30% of all patents in Sweden. So he would have been remembered as a bad guy, but that wake-up call changed him, his legacy, and the world.
Richard III of England is getting a better look. They say he was actually a good king and that after he was deposed it was propaganda that ruined his name.
That guy from the B-movie. He was the only sane person tbh.
My bro Hades is the nicest man in all of Greek mythology. He's kind to his wife, doesn't cheat on her, and sure, he kidnapped her, but it was ordered he did. And Persephone really likes him and they love each other. He's always held truth to people, never cheated someone on deals, and when some dude tried to bang his wife he tortured him for all of eternity. The man is a Chad.
Lucrezia Borgia wasn't actually as much of a villainous femme fatale as she was made out to be. I enjoy the character archetype, but she wasn't an example of one.
This is a complicated one, and not necessarily okay, but Neville Chamberlain is a fairly good example of this. For context, Chamberlain is generally known, notoriously, as being the prime minister prior to WW2 that let Germany rise to power through appeasement. Because of this he's seen as weak, and virtually the poster child tagged tethered to the quote, "All it takes for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing." In actuality, if you dive into history of the time, in the late 30s the UK was so wildly behind Germany's war machine that there wasn't anything they could do that wouldn't be blatant suicide. Their manufacturing was leagues behind, and their front was in no way organized. So during the time of appeasement behind Chamberlain, the UK was rapidly building up its armies and navies in attempt to compete and, well, not get utterly flattened, which of course ultimately led to victory against the Axis. But during the time of appeasement as the armies were built, yes, he was viewed as weak and cowardly as a result. Edit. Quick addition. So someone asked for sources on this, which is great. You should always double check everything on the internet, as Reddit is no haven from disinformation on the internet. As requested, here's a source showcasing that under Chamberlain's command, the military defense budget in England utterly exploded from 15% to 48% in preparation for the upcoming and inevitable war. Note importantly that this armament was between 1935 and 1939, allowing the Brits an attempt to catch up to Germany's increasing military force. Daily.jstore.org Reconsidering appeasement.
Khrushchev was actually the bigger man during the Cuban Missile Crisis. He initiated the negotiations and even let Kennedy look like the hero by keeping America's side of the bargain secret. Not to mention all the measures he took afterwards to prevent something like it from happening again.
Not quite history, but the Grim Reaper. Grim isn't killing you, he's just keeping you company. He's the buddy system. Also, people outside of Romania hate Vlad the Impaler, but in Romania, he's seen as a hero.
Brutus. He's gone down as committing one of history's greatest betrayals, but what he actually did was choose his republican ideals over a man he personally loved, who had sparked a civil war with an illegal invasion of Italy, and was unquestionably acting like an autocrat. Edit. Just to avoid overstating things, republican, in the context of ancient Rome basically meant a bunch of wealthy aristocrats ran the show. Still, it had been the lawful governmental structure since Rome kicked out their last king a few centuries earlier.
Thomas Sankara, when he led Burkina Faso, it was probably the most progressive African nation at the time, and even by today's standards it would be up there when compared to them. He was also responsible for not only making it less reliant on France, but also its name, which used to be Upper Volta, and interestingly, since he was a guitarist, he also wrote the new national anthem. He was assassinated in 1987 after a coup.
Marie Antoinette. She was far from perfect, yes, but she was shipped away from home at 14 years old to a country that hated pretty much everything about her homeland, with an economy that was already starting to fray at the seams. Yes, she lived extravagantly, being literally the queen and having to keep up appearances, but she was often falsely accused of major beep that she had nothing to do with. She never said let them eat cake. She was impersonated and held responsible for one of the most expensive jewelry pieces in France's history. The people of France were never going to like her, and took every opportunity to hate her more. Edit. Some people are interpreting this as me thinking she was a great person. I don't know enough about her to have that kind of opinion. I'm just saying that she likely wasn't the heartless, hedonistic villain she's often made out to be.
The Persian Empire gets a bad rap these days. Now make no mistake, the Persians were brutal imperialists and slave traders. But then so was every other empire at the time. The Persian Empire was actually one of the most diverse and culturally accepting empires in human history. Their standard policy of leadership was to allow cultures they took over to retain their own customs, their own laws, and even their own leaders. Provided they didn't rebel and paid their taxes on time, they more or less left you alone. Plus, all subjects got to benefit from the rich trades routes and the security of their armies. On average, Persian citizens, in particular women, enjoyed more rights than nearly any other empire of the time. So whilst I can understand not wanting to be conquered by them, compared to the alternatives, you could have done a lot worse.
Anne Boleyn. When the king sets his eyes on you, you don't really get to say no. He'd already had his way with her sister and discarded her and their bastard son. So instead of being another ruined cast-off, she played her bad hand to the best of her ability and made herself a queen. Eventually Henry got tired of her, which was his mo, after she failed to produce any living sons and he'd already set his sights on Jane. He needed a viable reason to get rid of her, and what better way to do it than rumors of infidelity, incest and witchcraft? He probably would have done something similar to Catherine of Aragon if she wasn't from a royal house you did not want to beep with. Helen of Troy is also similarly maligned. All she did was leave her, probably brutish, husband for another man. Agamemnon didn't give a single beep about his brother's wife, property, but her abduction did give him a perfect reason to go to war. Even if she'd tried to hand herself over, to almost certainly be killed by her enraged husband, it wouldn't have ended anything because she was just an excuse. Edit. Not really trying to debate whether Helen or the Trojan War were real. That's missing the point. Go jump on all the comments about Hades if you want to be pedantic.
Not really seen as much, but Claudius was a decent emperor emo. He wasn't quite Augustus, but if you compare him to the men who preceded and succeeded him, Gaius and Nero, he was a saint.
Marie Antoinette, Queen of Let Them Eat Cake. It's just a made-up lie by the revolutionary.
The captain of the Titanic.
Sorts by controversial.
May your day be filled with joy and happiness. And please remember to subscribe to Upvote for the best quality content every day.